Okay, this is Professor Powers, and I'm going to go through the slides for Chapter 2. Focus of Chapter 2 is really introduction to decision making processes, and the concept of processes. So the idea of a decision making process, I think we had talked about before. In business, basically, the essence of business is all decision making. Trying to make a decision um, with the best possible information for a particular outcome. So uh, an example of a process like that would be something like this: a six-step decision-making process. So the idea of initiating, starting with a problem identification, um, following with a data collection, basically what is the relevant data associated with the problem, the development of a solution, solution generation, the validation and testing of that solution, uh, process, or basically a selection of the correct solution or the optimal solution, and then that implementation. This is a fairly simple model, kind of intuitive, but if uh, it does call out the various, the different elements, particularly this idea of data-driven decision making. This number two becomes a big issue or a big factor in trying to make a good, solid, you know, decision. So decision making, the essentials of it. Basically, decisions occur everywhere in an organization. All right. Well, whether you're at the top of the organization or at the bottom of the organization. So the idea is, you know, each of these decisions have different characteristics depending upon where you're at. The focus on, at the operational level is more on kind of a technical, kind of a focused decisions associated with execution of a process. So you know, basically looking at some sort of criteria, then rendering a decision to make an adjustments or fine tune as necessary. That's at the operational level. There's another level up around the managerial, which is a little kind of evaluating what is happening at the operational level, and then translating that into a kind of seeing how things are occurring, and then making a series of decisions around how to make adjustments if necessary. And third, we have, at the top, we have strategic decision. So this is really the executive level. This is really the decisions around, what is the strategy of the organization? What are the objectives? How will that be measured? All of these criteria are factors that go into, those types of decisions. Um, as we said, if we look at the continuum here, technical skills from the operational side, and actually to some degree, even with the managerial, focuses on more of a technical. All right. As we move up the chain here, as we move into more of a strategic direction, the focus becomes more on people skills as opposed to technical skills. So the essence of this, operational decision making, as we said, employees develop core business activities required to run the day-to-day operations, all right, and decision makings that have to be they're associated with that. So those tend to be very structured, all right. So repetitive processes offer solutions. So what is our production schedule? What is the results of last night's production run? How does that match up against what our targeted objectives were? So that's kind of at the lowest level. At the managerial level, we talked around kind of the evaluation of what those operations are doing, not necessarily on a point solution, but really kind of looking at things more in an aggregate. Identifying operations, and seeking to both identify and leverage change where necessary. All right. So whereas from the operational side, you can categorize that stuff as structured. Get to the managerial level. Some of these things are uh, described as semi-structured. So where it's not as process driven as it would be at the operational level. So like the identification of what day of what's our best day for production, what's our quality results, over the course of a period of time. Who are our best customers by region? Those are the types of things that are focused on in this managerial level. And then finally, at strategic level, you know, the idea of the executive level, leaders developing overall strategies, goals, objectives from the high level. This tends to be more of an unstructured, right? We know it's not really driven by a process. It's not really driven by specific rules. It's like the idea of what new markets should we potentially be targeting the organization for? What is the kind of a longer term strategic direction? How, where, and how the organization which will compete. Those are the types of strategic decisions which basically are unstructured. Kind of using a combination of experience, using basically information kind of generated from below, but also kind of applying experience and wisdom to making a decision. So the idea of measuring an organizational business decision. There's a couple different ways to do that, but a couple ways, like for example, one way to that you see in a lot of organizations is the idea of a project. So definition of a project is a temporary activity to create a unique product service with a result. Key word on a project is a temporary. It is not a permanent. It is not an operation. A project is not an operation. A project is a project. So its main characteristics that it's temporary, and there's a series of decisions that are made within the execution of the project, all of which can be measured as the project is being executed. It's the idea of capturing metrics. One of the big issues is basically timeline is a measurement of execution against timeline. So these metrics are measurements that evaluate the results of whether a project is meeting its goals. Kind of how is it executed? Projects can be fairly short, or they can be long and extended. So the idea of being able to monitor and determine, evaluate what is happening over the course of an execution of a project is a key objective. Another area that beyond projects, another area that managers will be looking at, in trying to evaluate the effectiveness and kind of the impact of decision making is this concept of what we call critical success factors, CSF. So really, it's really the key factors, the steps that companies will make to achieve their goals. All right. So if we, once again, just touch kind of the high level view and strategy. So the idea of, create high quality products, identify and retain competitive advantages, reduction of production cost, increase customer satisfaction, hire and retain the best professionals. So these are the things that are the critical success factors that are tied into the success or failure of the organization and the implementation of the strategy. Specifically, as we look at, this idea of these critical success factors are fairly high, fairly high level. Key performance indicators are really where we target the quantifiable stuff. So there really are more specific quantifiable metrics a company uses to evaluate progress. Right? So, if we have for example, hire and retain the best professionals as a critical success factor, we will evaluate turnover rate of new employees. That would be a KPI we would want to evaluate to see how we're doing against that critical success factor. And other examples here, new customers, customer spending, profit margin on services, growth of services. So these are all things that the key term as we think about KPIs is it's a quantifiable metric. And you can have different types of KPIs. You can have external KPIs, which would be things like market share. What percentage of the market, of the overall market, that organization captures. Internal KPIs. So we look at things like return on investments. Providing some sort of quantitative measure of how successful we are through the execution of a project or investment. Another thing we talk about as we look at these at KPIs and metrics, this idea of efficiency versus effectiveness. All right. So efficiency is measuring the performance of something. All right. So in this case, uh, the specific measures of like within MIS or information systems. What is the performance of the MIS? So, say for example, you know, the efficiency of efficiency would be translated into things like transaction speed, system availability, you know, schedule, you know, execution of schedules, things of that nature. Right? Things that can be measured, um, measured of how well things are going. Effectiveness is really kind of in a broader sense. It's really what is the impact that it has in a broader sense. Impact on the business processes is the idea of if you have if you hit all of your metrics, your efficiency metrics like transaction speed, availability, things of that nature. What impact does that have in terms of overall effectiveness? So it's possible to have efficiency without effectiveness. Um, it's also possible to have effectiveness without efficiency. So you can have effective, you can have positive impact, but not necessarily be the most efficient. In terms of sloppy operations. But you can still be efficient. So either one, it's not a matter of an either or. The relationship is kind of symbiotic. Both what organizations seek to do is basically balance. We want to have high efficiency and high effectiveness. So if you look at this chart, the ideal operation occurs up in this kind of this upper right quadrant of this chart here. We're kind of focused on both efficiency and effectiveness. And you also note that this is kind of an area. Right? There's kind of a section of it. It's not a point. Right? So the idea is this can move at based upon different factors. You can move things back and forth as your, as circumstances change. Or trying to, improving efficiency, may have impact on effectiveness. Move something back on an interim basis, and then kind of move back another way. So it's the relationship. It's a dynamic relationship between the two. So the way some of the stuff we look at when we're looking at this measurement idea of measuring, this idea of establishing what we call benchmarks. Benchmark. The idea of benchmarking for efficiency would be things like what is what are the values associated with a what we would define as a effective performance. All right. So the idea of uh, those are specific measures, whereas efficiency is going to be you benchmarking for efficiency. What is the measure of the results comparing you know the um, the results versus what we perceive as optimal performance, and looking for be able to do improvements and identify improvement things that can be improved. So a couple of things we can do, within MIS to help facilitate, make business decisions. What approach would be, the idea of creating a model. So a model is defined as a simplified representation of reality. It's the idea of being able to create a simulation, whether it's mathematical, whether it could be computer based, it could be any, no, it can take a number of different forms, but the idea is it's a representation which can then be used to evaluate outcomes. It can help you, it can assist in things like calculating risks, what is uncertainty. You can change variables, what a relationship, well constructed model, but you can see the impact of adjusting one variable while maintaining others as constant, across multiple variables. So what are the things we see? We kind of tying back into this again. We look at our kind of our you know operational through executive operational through managerial through strategic levels. There are different types of systems that are associated with this stuff. So there's different styles of computing, different types of applications or computer applications that are associated with this. So with this operational, as we look at the operational structured level, this first level here, the types of systems we call transaction processing systems. So transaction processing system is focused on the execution of a business process. Uh, you know, like for example, the sale of a product. There's a number of steps that need to be executed to successfully sell a product. All right? And the idea of this transaction processing is optimized to do that. So it's measured on individual activities. It operates on on units of one. So basically, you sell one item, or you execute one sales process. And over the course of the day, you could do many thousands. You think about how many sales Amazon does during the day. That they have their system, the thing that runs the what you're interacting with on Amazon is a transaction processing system. The next level up is where we look at this intersection between, said these semi-structured types of decisions at the managerial level. It's a class of applications we call decision support systems. All right, and decision support systems are are designed to take the data that is generated as a byproduct of the execution of all these transactions and be able to provide analysis, be able to look at it, be able to aggregate it, filter it, um, be able to apply different kinds of algorithms, be able to detect patterns or activities and trends and things of that nature. And there's a whole series of applications that have been specifically designed, that are specifically targeted at doing this. So if we look at, transaction processing systems generate data as a byproduct of their execution. That data is then fed into decision support systems, which are then will then aggregate all of that information together and then kind of look at it and identify what's happening. And then as we look at the unstructured strategic, executive information systems. So as we move farther up into this, the question becomes one of um, success, fail, or things, are things going as we expect or not. So the idea is, as we take this analyzed information at the decision support level, basically that information can be translated into a visualization form. Think of that where you can kind of look and kind of take data and develop a picture of what's happening. Be able to, so an executive could look at it. I think one of the big styles you see is like a stop sign. So you see either red, green, blue, red, yellow, green. And you can kind of gauge, the information it's kind of being generated up the line will then translate into, okay, green, everything's going well. Yellow is, okay, it's in some sort of uncertainty. Red is obviously something it's not unmarked. But the idea is this becomes really from the executive level rather than having, from the executive level, you don't want to be dealing with all of the detail. The idea is trying to make it as simple and straightforward as possible as you can evaluate, grasp what's happening, and be able to make decisions about things. There's just a little bit more information. Operational support systems, transaction processing systems, OLTP. So these kind of interchangeable actually. What we see now, what you hear is this idea of like ERP systems, or which the style of computing is what we call online transaction processing. So the idea is, every event that gets that you deal with through the execution of a process is processed and captured through these OLTP systems. So the best examples we see, the well-known ones right now in the industry, SAP, which has really been in the ERP business for about 25 years, Oracle as well, probably their lead competitor. Basically, the systems that both these organizations have developed and maintained and support kind of do the same thing. They basically will execute, they're designed to execute specifically, everything that a business would need to do. So, say, for example, you can order, basically execute orders, um, execute distribution, run accounting processes, plant maintenance, all these different kinds of applications. These are all, can all be handled by these OLTP-based ERP systems. So our managerial support, all right, is, so, we call these transaction systems OLTP, which is actually a style of computing. As we look at the managerial support systems, the decision supporting systems, there's a different type of processing involved with that, what we call OLAP, online analytical processing. So the idea is, this is much more involved with manipulation, analyzing information, data, that can then be processed. So the structure, so one of the big differences between, say, for example, an OLTP system and an OLAP system is that the structure, the way the data is stored in these systems are very different. Right? So a OLTP system stores data in tables, kind of it's called, a style is called a relational database, but basically it's a series of tables, which is designed specifically, it's designed, it's optimized to run transactions. Whereas opposed to OLAP systems, which are really designed to be, analytical. So what will happen is the structure of OLAP is actually in the form of a cube, a three-dimensional cross-section of data. Right, so we call them data cubes. Right, so the structure is very different. There are different types of applications, different styles of applications. So you have OLTP on one side, OLAP is on the other side. Now, one of the things over time, the idea is that trying to move. I think one of the directions we're seeing a lot of organizations are trying to combine these back into a single environment. The challenge is, though, is that the way what's involved with online transaction processing, and the way you maintain and store data, and what you do in terms of OLAP, there's a reason why the structure is different. It's around being able to efficiently process this stuff. All right, so that's so there's a reason why you've seen kind of like an OLAP versus OLTP. Decision support systems, DSS, basically are models, to help support decision-making processes. So the idea is, and this is actually kind of the next level up. So this is kind of an analysis tool. Decision support is much more structured around specific areas, specific decision-making processes. Like, for example, a doctor's diagnosis. Basically going through, and then, so this becomes, as we kind of move from OLAP to DSS, you start seeing the introduction of what gets referred to as artificial intelligence, or kind of the evolution of kind of analytics. So the terms you hear around analytics kind of start here with the OLAP, and then kind of has evolved. Both of these, sometimes these things get used interchangeably, but there's this is a the decision-making support systems are actually beginning to evolve along the path of machine learning and artificial intelligence. So that's beginning, not fully realized yet, but we're getting there. This is just a kind of an example. As we said, there's two different types of systems, and so this is one class of applications. These are basically from transaction processing systems, which store everything in databases. The data is transferred, actually copied, moved from between one system and the other, and then analyzed and manipulated to be able to support in the decision support systems. All right, so these are two completely different types of applications. All right. And the idea is that decision support summarizes and aggregates information that will be collected from a transaction processing system. So just as we look at data, this idea of data and kind of the structure of data, across these three classes of decision making, you kind of see kind of the ways, the differences between them. So the idea is the granularity of the data, by which we mean, how, uh, you know, basically, how is this data structured? Granularity, like fine granularity is, every event is captured one record at a time, one event at a time. So that is referred to as fine grain support. Whereas coarse grain support is, uh, basically summarized numbers, consolidated numbers. Basically you got one number that represents a year's worth of production or a year's worth of sales. Right? So strategic, as we kind of move up, operational operates at the fine level, strategic kind of the bigger, basically you think about, a red, green, yellow. Uh, that representation is is an aggregation. The fact that you can pick one of those three colors is an aggregation of all of this detail that's maintained at the operational level. OLTP, as we've talked about this, OLTP from a transactional perspective, the operational level. OLAP, as we get into the managerial strategic, this is, from a process perspective, this is transactional at the operational level. This is analytical at, as we move up the organization. So each, as we look at each of the information levels, as you kind of move up, you see these, you see kind of these differences of the way, across different characteristics of granularity processing and kind of the associated processes. And EIS, we talk around kind of the executive information systems. They're very specialized kinds of systems. We're seeing more specifically designed to deliver information to executives for decision making. All right. So this idea of creation of visualization, of being able to take a series of analyses and based on numbers and turn it into, for one of a better term, pretty pictures. All right. So the user or the executive can look at that and be able to make a decision predicated on kind of what things are, kind of based upon the representation of the information that's in front of them. Right? So these are, pretty sophisticated. Actually, this is one of the things that you're seeing more and more around, especially as data has become, the analysis of data has become, it's really come to the fore as one of the key uh, tools in business execution, business operations. So as EIS systems become more and more a important item uh, for executives to be able to make informed decisions about what to do. So these, this kind of as we look at this executive information systems, actually, so what will happen is that a lot of times these things can combine the transactional information um, from developed from the applications, um, kind of that, which is basically what we see at the decision making level. But we can also see external sources of information, so industry information, stock market information, which then can be blended in. So you'll combine things like what we see in in the traditional analytic systems, the difference between kind of your first level OLTP to OLAP. That's in place, but we will also blend in external information, and correlate that to what's happening internally. So there's a fair, these systems are a lot more sophisticated. You know, it does basically makes a lot of, it can take a lot of different types of data and then translate it into a visualized form that can be used by an executive. So, idea of artificial intelligence. So, one of the key directions we're seeing is moving more towards what we call artificial intelligence to make business decisions. Um, the term artificial intelligence has been around actually for some period of time, like like 20, 30 years ago. There were people talking about artificial intelligence, but we're just beginning to get to the point now, both through a combination of processing capability, the development of algorithms, the ability to generate sufficient quantities of data to be able to store that data and be able to analyze that data to really make artificial intelligence work. Right? What it is, it's designed to simulate artificial intelligence, and kind of simulate the ability to reason and learn. All right. So this idea of being able to gather, and really the key in a lot of ways is really the ability of what we call big data, to be able to generate larger and larger sets of data to be able to process. Gives you the ability and then the sophistication of the both the horsepower of the machines to do it and the sophistication of the algorithms to be able to do this. So we're beginning to get there. So you'll hear the term machine learning is a term that gets you're starting to hear more and more about. It's like a big area in terms of research. It's not really totally come to the fore yet, but it's clearly one of those items that we're seeing, and quite frankly, it's going to have the impact of this as it across different organizations in different ways is yet to be fully realized, but it's definitely out there. So here's some examples, and there's a couple different artificial intelligence types of classifications of systems. So we say expert systems. So example like in medical, computerized advisory programs like experts. So that's the example you see here, medical diagnosis or Watson. I think that was, if you recall, Watson was the basically the system that was designed and implemented. From a demonstration perspective, it played the game of Jeopardy and basically beat everyone. All right, so it's pretty, some fairly sophisticated stuff with that. Neural network has been around a while, so it's actually been, it's not necessarily brand new. So the concept of neural networks, emulates the way the human brain works. Has been around conceptually, mathematically. Neural networks have been around. Translating that into a technology platform is what's new. All right. So the idea of being able to take develop a simulation of human brain or human learning. The idea of how to use fuzzy logic. How do people actually make decisions, and how do people what are the criteria, evaluation of criteria. So this is just, I said, it's been around in terms of conceptual and modeling. Translating it into a particular platform is something that's been kind of getting there. Genetic algorithms. So the the idea of from an optimization, the idea of as we say here, a survival of the fittest process to generate better solutions for a problem. Right? Which stock should we invest in our portfolio? So you're seeing this is, you think about the amount of data that gets processed within this, and to be able to make to be able to analyze the data to make a correct decision, is very substantial. So, and this is, as I said, we're getting there a bit at a time. We're beginning to see more and more of it. The question is, once that as these things come to the fore, what's going to be the business impact? What's going to be the society impact around these things? So this is, on the horizon, something it's out there, has been impactful, and will probably likely be even more impactful. And intelligence agents. You see a lot of this is kind of a very specialized. So these actually, you've seen more intelligent agents out there because they're a little bit more focused and a little bit more directed than, say, for example, some of these other types. So the idea of like shopping bots and things like that, be able to collect bits of information, but more special purpose um, types of applications. And then virtual reality, which is really another type of the creation of a simulated environment, of either a real or imaginary world. So some of the things you see, this idea of virtual surgery, kind of different kinds of simulation, kind of different types of I think some of the environments we've seen is like, virtual reality, like a suit kind of thing, as we call it here, hard light virtual reality suit. There's a couple different. There's a couple different um, things that are out there that are kind of around that. Actually, see some of the stuff in terms of like entertainment as opposed to, but it also stands has some very practical um, value, particularly like military applications and things of that nature. So let's talk a little bit about business process. So our definition of a process is uh, a collection of steps or a series of steps that are executed in a particular sequence to give you an expected outcome. Historically, processes were not, um, up until about maybe 25 years ago, processes were not necessarily a big focus area. All right. Most organizations, most executives would focus on like metrics, basically financial metrics. But about 25 years ago, we kind of saw the first big change in terms of the way organizations um, started using information systems and kind of overhauling their kind of their legacy generation applications. Realization really became that companies can gain a competitive edge when they streamline their business processes. So, this was a big thing. Basically, in order to change business processes and streamline business processes, it's a combination of two things. One is you change the organizational structure, and then you apply technology to that, and with the idea of being able to execute an end-to-end um, process, streamlined. So the examples, probably one of the best examples, organization that really had focused on this Federal Express, the idea of what they've done in terms of defining, and optimizing a business process for their package delivery. So the idea is what you do is you define the process, uh, you measure the process, you analyze the results of the process, and then you go back and fine tune it and improve it and accelerate it. So the idea is you see a lot of work around this. The numbers of processes that organizations do, obviously will vary by the process, but it can be measured, hundreds upon, potentially thousands of different types of processes that really get executed, within an organization. So, in accounting, creating a financial statement or paying accounts payable, marketing and sales, calculation, promoting of discounts, identifying customers, operations, ordering inventory, production schedules, production and execution schedules, manufacturing, human resources. So each one of these is really, as I said, each one of these things, in order to do something in an organization, there's a series of tasks, that are constructed, which have an expected outcome. So that is this whole, and this has really been, I think, one of the areas where IT has played probably one of the bigger roles, over the past, as we look at modern organizations, this idea of understanding the importance of business processes and basically using it to drive efficiencies, um, on an ongoing basis. So we have a couple different ways of some different types of business processes. So we have ones that are customer facing, so something that, an engagement with a customer, in some fashion, either, for the requesting of goods or is through dialogue or engagement with customers. Product and pro service are received by a customer. And then business facing processes. You don't see it, but essential to the really the operation. So you see a lot of stuff that happens behind the scenes. Uh, and we see some examples up here, customer facing processes, order processing, customer service, industry, this idea of there's actually, and different businesses can have different kinds of specific customer-facing processes. So, in banking, you have loan processing, hotels, reservation handling, airlines, baggage handlers. These are all just different examples of different, industry-specific processes. And then business facing processes, strategic planning, budget forecasting, training, purchase of raw materials. So this is all, kind of, and both work together. So the idea of processes can be both, you know, you know, focused in terms of engagement with markets. It could be done in terms of, internal. Could be done basically engagement with suppliers. So there's a whole, every organization kind of defines and runs its own processes. There's some general, I mean, obviously there's some general, well-defined, kind of well-known processes, but really each organization will construct the processes, based on its own terms. So kind of the personality or the culture of that organization. A lot of times will determine how, will determine how what the processes are. So BPM, business process modeling or mapping. So it's really what it is. Basically it's a documentation of creating a flow of how a process works. So the idea of a detailed flowchart process map, and where the focus is what are the inputs, what are the tasks, what are the activities, what are the outputs. So a lot of the analysis that would go into this was, we do is you would go through and identify what the current state is. What is the current model? How do things work currently? What are the steps? Who does what? How to get them? And then go back then once you have defined what the current state is, then go back and take a look at what, trying to determine what a future process, what would be the better, what's the improved process, what it would look like. You might take out steps, you might, restructure the way things flow. So the idea is you kind of evaluate the stuff and then execute the changes necessary. And some things might be organizational changes. Some things might require technology changes. So there's a whole variety of things that can come into play with business process modeling. Here's just an example of order. So this is kind of what we call order fulfillment, or another term you'll hear thrown around is like order to cash. So the idea is you can see here all of the different organizations or different sections of the organization company that are involved with this stuff. So obviously externally the customer, but internally we have these different departments of sales, billing, inventory, shipping. Each of one has some engagement at some point. If you'll note, so it's not just simply one organization doing it. There's a dependency between all of these. So the idea is that with these business process modeling, the idea is to identify all of the different players in the game and what are their engagement points. So this becomes a pretty, this actually gets kind of an interesting exercise, especially when, if you're involved with trying to, make changes to a pretty well-established system. Because sometimes these business process modeling, requires organization changes. And whenever you're dealing with organization changes, you're dealing with people, and in dealing with some of the vagaries of, people and change it can be there's can be challenges associated with that. The application of a technology within this. So as we said, technology can be a piece with it. It can be played with this. Technology enables you to do things faster and can do things more efficiently. So the idea is it's been really used as an accelerant. So a combination of business process reengineering plus the application of technology has really been the driver that has driven a lot of improvements in efficiency. All right. So the idea of like a creation of workflow, standardization of tasks, activities, responsibilities to be able to do stuff. All right. So the example we talk about is order to cash, but we also have things like procure to pay, which is on the purchasing side, request to close in terms of maintenance, um, hire to retire for human resources, and there's a couple other ones out there. But basically, you get the idea. There's a whole series of different types of processes that engage, really kind of engage the organization that make up what the nature of work is in the organization. So the idea of it's a combination of different things. So the idea is you can apply MIS in a number of different um, arenas here. So the idea of from an operational perspective, you can use technology to automate things. People, instead of simply having everything being manual, pieces of this stuff can be fully automated or maybe partially automated to improve efficiency. From a managerial perspective, we can do streamlining. So the idea of being able to restructure, be able to restructure how things are done, be able to take out any, identify inefficiencies and reorganize and restructure. So you see kind of, you'll see the kind of automation. A lot of organizations early on did, there's a lot of more emphasis on automation. This was back in like the 70s. What you saw was kind of these organizations, what companies would do, they would bring in a computer application to help automate pieces of a process. You got efficient, and you gained advantages around that. You just kind of saw a streamlining, which is the next thing. The next big area, which is really kind of ties back into the strategic, is really this idea of re-engineering, which is rethinking the entire organization, restructuring the organization. There was a whole body of body of work that was done in the 90s, early 90s, which kind of rippled through to about 2000 or early, kind of early 21st century around this business process reengineering, where the advocates around that would emphasize, rather than these things right here, if you just automate or you just streamline, you're kind of incrementally trying to prove things. The idea of business process reengineering is you blow the whole thing up. You basically take everything apart, bring it down to its component parts, and reassemble it the way it should be assembled. Very challenging, because what happens is, you basically, when you think about it, you're dealing with working organizations that are, that are looking to, looking to execute on an ongoing basis. So, trying to go and tear everything down and rebuild it and reorganize it and restructure it, kind of re-engineer it, on the fly. You hear a lot of stories around, like ERP implementations and some of the challenges associated with those things. So that's kind of the whole idea. So the idea of, you know, these things here, the automation, streamlining, is sort of a kind of an incremental kind of focus, whereas the re-engineering becomes a radical redoing. But you saw a lot of organizations engage in it. I mean, a lot of results you see, a lot of organizations now are really the product of what was engaged in that business process re-engineering. So the idea, just a little bit more around that, the idea of you can improve the way you travel the road by moving from foot to horse to car to plane. The idea of being able to do things faster, better, cheaper. Overhaul. The idea is BPR is go back to ground zero. Don't incrementally change it, but actually rebuild things the way it should be. All right. So it's bold stuff, very expensive, and actually in a lot of ways is very risk. It's really kind of as time is going on, organizations come to realize that when you undertake BPR, obviously you know what the you have a goal in mind, but there's a lot of work that has to be done, and the amount of risk associated with it, the amount of effort it takes, may be more than some organizations are willing to take on. Strategic. So this is as an example from a claims resolution process. Progressive. really is going. It takes claim settlements down from 31 days to 4 hours, which is pretty radical. So it's a combination of process, business reorganization, application of technology, a combination of all of these things put together, uh, which have really enabled that sort of quantum leap in efficiency. And that is really it for chapter 2.